growing monster whitetail bucks.
Alright guys, today's video is the appearance of bucks and does in the springtime and some of the deception that comes with that in making your deer look worse than what they actually are. Okay, so we gotta think about a deer's full life cycle as far as season to season. We know that their coats will change based on daylight hours. Once they hit a certain threshold, the daylight kicks in and you start seeing those spring and summer coats, which are red. Some deer are blonde color, just depends on genetics, but the coat will change. And then the hair on the coat is much shorter on the deer in the spring and summer to help the deer from overheating. Now, when you see those deer in the springtime, that look skinny, they look way off the mark from their previous weight. It's almost like they're going in reverse from your management program. Well, that's because the bucks are also on a different body trajectory versus the does. So this is kind of like the opposite end of the rut, where the bucks grow and look bigger and the does stay, in this steady state. And in the spring and summer, the does start getting bigger and the bucks get smaller. And I'll talk about that here. That is testosterone levels dropping in a buck. So when you see, these 1.5, 2.5, all the way up to 5.5-year-old deer that are just not showing the body mass you saw in the late winter or early fall time frame, that is because their testosterone has dropped. Now, this is just one of the causes, and their muscle mass is back on the decline. So no matter how good your management program is, the bucks will slim down. They will go back to that lean muscle build. On top of that, you get a brand new coat. It's so short-haired that you can see every detail in those deer when it first comes on. So if ribs wasn't showing because of the winter coat had such long hair, you get this new coat and there you see a rib cage that's kind of showing through the hair. That short hair is revealing what was hidden from you in that winter coat. Now also, when bucks are slimming down, their necks, their faces, everything will look really thin. Not what you're thinking of, if a deer has had a neck that's been swollen during the rut and it's 28, 30 inches plus around, and then suddenly you see it back in the spring and summer and it's only 14. That is a massive difference, and it almost looks like the deer's gotten sick and something's wrong with it. But that's just the way it works for these deer. So that's something I'm not concerned about as far as how the deer look in the spring and summer. Yeah, they are skinnier and smaller looking because they're just changing out for the seasons. Now, the good thing is, if the buck is healthy, the older it gets, even in the spring and summer, you can still see the difference in muscle mass between a mature buck and a 1 to 2 or 3-year-old. Okay, all you got to do is look at the face. It'll have that Roman nose, the eyes are squinting, there's more muscle detail in the face. So those deer are more in prime mode, and they will look bigger than your other younger bucks, but their muscle mass has still dropped off the charts while their testosterone is dropping. So that big muscle-bound rut-crazed buck looks more like a normal, smaller, slimmed-down buck. Now, other things that can affect a deer's body, and this is just bucks, we'll get to the does here in a second, is the habitat provided for the deer. So as far as my goal, by the time we have spring and summer crops being put in here, I don't want to see rib cages on my deer. Okay, that means they have not got enough food in their bodies during the winter, because it is the hardest time on a deer and it takes the longest to recover. So these management programs where we put food year round really helps with the bottom end look of your deer. So if a buck, during the summertime, you got you know, beans, corn. Well, corn, only if they eat the leaves will corn help them. But if you got beans, brassicas, different, you know, greenery going in the spring and summer, those deer can bulk up really fast. So as you see progression from April to May, you'll see that those deer are, you know, looking thin. They're probably at their leanest point. And then from basically toward the end of May, June, July, August, they're bulking right back up. They're getting bigger. They're filling out more. Also, the buck's testosterone level is slowly rising when this happens. So his muscle will start to thicken back up again in July and August. And then when it comes time for the hard horn to appear, the testosterone is already on a new level. You'll start seeing those bucks swell up and look more like what you were used to seeing. And if you have a good management program, that buck should be bigger than he was the year before. So your hard work in that spring and summer mode where they look really thin will start to show up, not only in antlers, but the muscle build that the bucks have. You'll start seeing they just look like they're more basically thick. They're built like a brick house of lean muscle, and that muscle will slowly turn into bulk as the season progresses. So that's your goal, is to build up that muscle through the use of protein and a lot of nutrients. If you don't have good soil like what I was combating, you're just not going to see the better end of those results. Your deer will top out to a certain extent based on the amount of food you have, the nutrients in your soil, and surrounding habitat. So if you have poor habitat, you might as well expect to see those really thin, ugly looking deer. And I'm referring to bucks right now still. Also, weather conditions play a huge role in how deer can look. So you will see from year to year, based on weather conditions, that can fluctuate. If you have a early warm season, and green up per se in your habitat areas over here can happen a couple of weeks faster, you know, that can change the outlook of your deer, or even 3 weeks faster. You know, that's an extra 3 weeks where they're actually eating something that they couldn't before. So early green ups tend to sport larger antlered bucks, just because that is the bulk of their diet, is everything over here and not necessarily this. Now, deer that are accustomed, say the Midwest, you know, woods like this is going to be harder to find, which actually benefits them because now they have more options for food and they get bigger. I mean, that's the big difference between here and there. They got better nutrients. Those bucks average 40 to 60 some odd pounds heavier than my deer do. In some cases, I could say on the high-end body sizes, they're probably a good 100 pounds to 150 pounds heavier than my deer on the top-end body weights. So that's insanely different. That is literally like a whole size buck around here of a 150 pound buck. That is literally how much bigger they are. It's one body size of a standard buck around here. That changes a lot when you're looking at deer. So again, that is their most disappointing look to them in the early season. But as long as you see those healthy signs that not necessarily a whole lot of rib is showing, you don't want a lot. If it's a high amount of rib showing, there's a chance that deer's had a rough season. He is not fully recovered, and or parasites is in his intestines preventing him from gaining the weight he needs. Or the deer's been sick. I mean, there's all kinds of things that nature can throw at us to make these deer look small and thin. Now let's get on to the side where the does are concerned. Okay, and this is kind of a neat little thing that maybe people don't think about. A doe will be pretty consistent throughout its entire life. You'll see it go from a fawn growing up to a full-size mature doe. Their bodies stay the same. The only time they look bigger is when they're pregnant. And there's that initial transition stage that when you see a doe in the springtime, she suddenly starts to show some type of bulk to her body. And yes, the hair change comes in. You'll start seeing a lot more detail on her body, ribs possibly showing with a little bit of a pop belly at that time, depending on when your deer change color. And they start to look bigger just because that gut is growing. Also, does are having to eat at a much higher rate than they was in the, like the fall, the winter, or midwinter, late winter. And then as the fetus develops, or fetus is, they're going to have to keep eating more and more. So a buck, on the other hand, he's hungry from the rut, so they're going to eat as much as they can. But eventually that diet is kind of going to plateau out to a certain extent to whatever they can handle. A doe, they're burning through so many calories trying to grow those baby fawns, they're going to probably out-eat a buck. I mean, they're going to be really hungry. So when you see a doe start bulking up earlier than you would a buck in the spring, that is just, to me, is the natural process of how deer look in the spring and summer times. Does, when their coats change, if you start seeing a lot of rib, I would be more concerned that doe is not getting enough food, possibility of parasites. If you want to use supplemental feeding to remove parasites, you can. You can also plant things in here like okra and other things. I know people have used cotton to help remove parasites of those cotton seeds, but they have also found that reduces buck sperm count, and I would rather not mess with a buck sperm count because I'm trying to increase population. So I will use other plants that can help assist with parasite removal on top of supplemental feeding programs that can give it something much stronger to help flush out the system. And once you get those parasites out of the system, that ugly, scrawny deer that looks sick, a lot of ribs showing, within a 6 to 8 weeks, that same deer will look totally different to you because it's packing on weight. It can use all the nutrients, and the parasites are not stealing from that deer, especially if it's a doe and she's loaded with parasites. That is bad news. If she has twins or even more, you're putting ample amount of stress on her body by not dealing with parasites in supplemental feeding, and or putting something out here that at least gives you the chance to remove those parasites. Like I've got okra growing in here. It's scattered out, not heavy amounts, but it's there, and if they need it, they can eat on it and help flush the system. Also, let's talk about how the deer behave at this point. Bucks in the rut become very territorial. Okay, does are along for the ride at this point. They're going to do their normal routine or something close to it, as long as they're not being hounded. Bucks will claim, like, say, this whole field, this food plot, this is mine. I'm here to protect it. You guys stay out. This is my set of does. Okay, bucks are that type of territorial. Now, the script flips when the does are in spring and summertime. The bucks will no longer be pushing each other around. They will be calmer, more humble, and they group back up into bachelor groups. Okay, that's what you want. That's age structure at work, especially if you're allowing deer to grow older. It is important that you have those older bucks in that age bracket to help teach the young ones. Now, does, on the other hand, once these babies are born, they become territorial. They will fight bucks for food. They will also fight bucks to keep them away from fawns because bucks can kill them. Okay, so does become the aggressor in the spring and summertime. And I've seen it here many times where I've got my regular deer here. They have claimed this territory. All my does have claimed this territory as this food plot is their own. If a buck shows up, one or two things happens, depending on the size of the buck. If it's young bucks, they will literally, I have watched them chase them all the way out of this food plot back up into the woods to keep them away. Now, if it's a big buck, let's say a 3-year-old or older, or sometimes a 2.5-year-old with a little bit of extra body size, they might be a little more hesitant, but they still will stand their ground. I have seen a 3.5-year-old out here before who had a lot of promise. And I'd say at the time he probably weighed, this is about middle of July, so he probably weighed about 150 on the hoof, maybe a little more, which is not, ginormous body size. And those does stared at him, and they had a stare down for 40 minutes. And finally, the does grouped up and went toward him and pushed him out. Okay, as a person with limited space, limited use of food plots, I don't like that. I want the bucks to come in here and eat too. It's just as important to me as those does eating out here. Okay, so that means a lot of times these bucks are reduced to eating over here, which affects their summer outcome body-wise. Here, this stuff packs on a lot of weight. My does have hit 160 pounds, maybe pushing 165 before. Of course, now those older does are going downhill and they've dropped somewhere into the lower 150s, maybe upper 140s. They're 7.5 years old. They're just past their prime. But I have other does showing, they're coming up. They're looking strong. They're going to at least try to compete for that title, if not at least hit 150. Okay, that's what we're looking for, because these deer are out here all the time. So you can change a deer's look in that spring and summertime through the use of food plots. You're putting a whole bunch of edible stuff in here versus they have to walk through here and maybe cover 20, 30 plus acres just to fill their belly up. Okay, that's a lot of wasted energy, which is why those deer can also stay thinner longer than you want them to, unless you have a nice open savanna type habitat where they can just take a few steps, eat something, take another step, eat something else. Everything that we do affects that springtime look of a deer. And yeah, it's kind of disappointing when you see a big buck that is there and he shows back up on your camera and the deer's lost 40% of his initial weight. I mean, sometimes that's how it goes. And other times he may look like he's lost 25 to 30. Just depends. All right, so that video should hopefully help clear a few things up. It is about perception as the hair grows in length, and this includes all 4 seasons. Once they get that spring summer coat, it's really short haired, but as the season continues, that hair gets a little longer, a little longer, a little longer, and to the point to where it starts looking a little ratty by the time you're ready to see the next coat change. And then when it shows up, your bucks look sleek. Their muscles are really starting to pop because the hair is so short initially. And by the way, that muscle size is on the increase when that coat change happens, which is why they look better than they do in the spring and summer, because their testosterone is still down. All right, guys, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. Plenty more to do. Ton of rain today, nearly 6.5 inches, and we may have more coming. You all have a good one.